And we are live. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us on the WP Agency Summit. I'm here with my buddy Oliver Sild, who runs WebARX Security, and we are going to dive deep into web security. Specifically, we are going to debunk some of the myths that web security news actually use to exploit to mislead the public about the impact that hacks can actually have on the website. We are going to show a demo of how hacks actually work and a lot more. Oliver, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you to WebARX for supporting this event as a silver sponsor.
Thanks for having me, and I'm very happy to be a sponsor for that event. I remember it from the last year and even this year. I mean, it's amazing. The content that you provide to the to the whole WordPress ecosystem is amazing. And over the time, like at the moment, everybody's still sitting at home, right? Having the possibility to actually still experience this is very. I'm very grateful for that. What you're doing.
Thank you very much. Can you take a minute and introduce yourself and what WebARX is?
Sure. I think I'm gonna share the screen right away as well in that case.
Yeah, let's do it.
One moment. All right. So yeah, today I'm gonna talk a little bit about the vulnerabilities in WordPress ecosystem, what's happening in there, and all that. But to first dive into, I'm Oliver. I'm actually the co-founder and the CEO of WebARX. So what WebARX really is, it's a platform, but not just platform. What we are focused on is plugin vulnerability monitoring. So we make sure that you as a developer or an agency know what kind of third-party code you are using on your websites. That includes WordPress plugins, themes, different kind of JavaScript libraries, and so forth. And additionally, we then apply virtual patches, or let's call them security modules, for these vulnerabilities, which are on let's say on your websites or in the plugins that you use on your websites. And yeah, we are building it as platform agnostic. So WebARX also supports other PHP-based content management systems. What we do also in WebARX is that we do penetration testing for plugin developers. So plugin developers come to us and we help them to address and fix the potential issues within the plugin's code before this becoming a public matter or before this gets into the wrong hands. So yeah, as I briefly already said, WebARX is for digital agencies who mainly have tailored care plans, so it can fit nicely in there. It's much more cost efficient as you can add a lot of sites into the single place, and it allows you to have a single point of information about the security of all your websites. And on the second hand, it's good for web developers because it's very easy to set up. It gives you direct access to the logs, and the lightweight managed WAF actually gives you it removes a kind of overhead from managing a web application firewall. And so for the lightweight system that we built around PHP allows you basically to use WAF without having any performance impact. And probably with DNS-based firewalls, you would kind of have some sort of limitation on how many firewall rules you can create, or let's call them page rules, which is a term used by Cloudflare, for example. With WebARX, because it's sitting on in-app, so it's aware of the website itself, like what kind of modules, code, everything is installed within the website, and because it sits in there, you can actually create unlimited amount of custom rules. So you can really go crazy and start, filtering to traffic in a ways you want, and make it really, the most efficient as you can have in that term. So some statistics: we prevent over 500,000 threats every single month on average. So this is only the exploitation attempts, not bot filtering. So it's not like some, it doesn't include someone tried to access your, someone tried to brute force your admin user, or try to enumerate the accounts, or there was just bots trying to crawl your website, or that kind of stuff. It's very specific to the threats that are actually meant to exploit the website, inject something into the website, and so forth. And we provide protection modules for approximately 50 WordPress plugins theme core vulnerabilities each month. So basically, every time you hear or see about any WordPress vulnerability or anything like that, we have a team who basically provides or creating modules for every single vulnerability, and these modules are being shipped automatically to our customers' websites. So if you're, let's say, if a vulnerability is, for example, released in US time zone and you're in EU, the hackers already have advantage of start exploiting this vulnerability. If you're using WebARX, you will get fixes automatically applied to your website. So you have time either to go and update in the morning, or it can really save your ass in that terms.
That highlights the broad audience that we are having in this call. Thank you, everybody, for coming up from all across the globe. So we have US, San Francisco, we have Arizona, England, Holland, Sweden, Maryland. This is so cool to see.
Yeah, and also in our team, I mean, as we are building WebARX as a company, we have decided to go distributed from the day one. It has obvious benefits for us, as we are working on a scale where we need to have some sort of attendance at all times. So we have people in the US, we have people in the Europe, so we could cover all the time zones. And if something new pops up or something that needs attention right away, we have someone on the team already available, basically. So yeah, building distributed team from that sense is very good. And I think in overall, like, digitalization and whatnot has made the company, companies, and also, like, I guess the environment in general very, very international, which I appreciate. It's very good. So one of the things I want to talk about today is about the vulnerabilities. I guess you've heard about 0 days, and if you have not, I'm going to tell you right away. But there's different kind of vulnerabilities in that sense. I'm not going to dive deep into like what are like the different specific vulnerability types, like cross-site scripting and SQL injection vulnerabilities and so forth. But I'm more like talking about what you see often on the WordPress ecosystem. And one of the first things I want to talk about is 0-day vulnerabilities. So 0 days are something that are usually not known to the public while they are being exploited, which means that let's say a hacker finds a vulnerability within a code, and he doesn't notify, or obviously he's not ethical, so he's not notifying about this vulnerability to the developer. So instead, he starts exploiting this vulnerability right away. So he, for example, starts injecting some ads to the site and so forth. And usually it takes time until security companies or the vendor itself gets notified about the breaches, and then they start actually working on the patch that the vulnerability for the vulnerability, let's say. And yeah, usually the developers are not aware of it being exploited in the first place, and it takes time for them to then start addressing it and providing the fix for that. And during the whole time, the hackers can actually just exploit this, and users have no protection against it, other than if they use like security services which have firewall and generic rules that allow you to filter, let's say, cross-site scripting or this kind of vulnerabilities. And these 0-day vulnerabilities often cause a lot of havoc. So they are mostly very dangerous in their nature. They're usually give the hacker a very specific value. Either they can just upload something to the website, redirect the traffic completely, inject backdoors, and so forth. Sometimes 0 days are also being used on the background in terms of in a way that they don't exploit the site right away in a very obvious way, but instead they inject let's say backdoors, or there's things called droppers to the website. So later when the vulnerability is kind of already forgotten, the websites are actually injected with a backdoor that allows or a dropper that allows the hacker to then basically upload a backdoor or upload a malicious script to the website, but later on. So like not directly on the same time as the vulnerability was found. And then after the developer finds the patch, then users have time to patch it and so forth. But yeah, this is kind of like the overall look of the zero-day vulnerabilities that you have probably witnessed or heard about, at least.
So that's something that, especially when we hear about zero-day, it's something to keep in mind that we don't know for how long this vulnerability has been exploited, because it's just the first time it sees the public, essentially, or the public sees the vulnerability. One thing I wanted to mention for all the people watching this can be, depending on your level of understanding, it can be overwhelming what we are going to talk about, because web security is a little bit technical, and it's more technical than, for example, your average webinar on marketing. With that being said, don't hold back on any questions, because that's what we are here for. There's no such thing as a stupid question. You won't look stupid, or we won't make fun of you if you're asking a question. It's quite the opposite. We appreciate when questions come in so that we can understand which topics to dive deeper into and to better explain, so that you get the most value out of this conversation.
Yeah, and really, just and that also applies to you, John, because you need to ask me the questions, because otherwise I just tend to get too technical, and it can be very hard to understand me at some point. So
no problem at all.
Okay. The second thing is a one-day vulnerability. So what one-day vulnerability really is that it's usually a fixed or patched by the developer already. So let's say a security company such as us, we find a vulnerability within a popular plugin. We then let the developer know about it. Developer then starts to work on the fixes. It depends on the developer, but it in most cases takes some time. And then when they patch the vulnerability, they basically, if you know what changelog is, basically changelog is in the when you go to a plugin repository in WordPress, if you click on the developer kind of menu there, you will see a changelog, which is basically a list or a log of changes that have been done within the code of the plugin, let's say. And in many cases, when a vulnerability is being reported to a developer and then they fix it, they basically add that bug fix or security fix, and then they write like added some nonsense, for example, or added some additional checks, for example. And hackers monitor that. I mean, they know that the developers are writing these things there, and they just keep a very focused eye on, especially on the very popular plugins, for detecting these kind of fixes there. Because then what they can do is that they can just take the new version, the fixed version, where they see this security fix done, for example, and then they take the earlier version of the plugin, and then they just compare the code base and they see what have been changed, so they can actually see where is the vulnerability within the previous version. And now it really happens in the matter of hours, where they start preparing the exploits, and then they start basically firing this against every website on, like, we've mostly seen that they are not even enumerating first if this plugin is installed on a specific
They're saving
website.
time and just attacking blind.
Yeah. So because
Wow.
because for them, the more time they wait, the more people are going to update the plugin.
Of course, yeah. So essentially, the thought process from the hacker perspective is trying to save time by just looking for something that has been fixed already, knowing that the majority of the users of that plugin have not rolled out the update, likely. They then use software to compare the files of the older version of that plugin with the security breach to the newer version with the fix in it. So that is, for people not familiar with this process, it takes minutes to find the changes in the code lines and to then understand what happened. And then they just write a script that attacks the websites automatically. Is that the correct summary? And I do have a
Yeah.
question from Elmar coming up next as well, and that's a question I have myself too. So
So
let
go.
let me bring that up real quick. Will you guys do an Absomo deal again?
Yeah. This is a question we get a lot. At this point, I'm not so sure, but I suggest you to wait for the Black Friday because I'm sure we're gonna have some deals available for you guys.
Oh, nice. I'm scratching my fingers. And then there's another question coming in from Matt Frost. I'm just waiting for StreamYard to get this question in. Matt, thanks again for joining this webinar. I appreciate that you are attending all these sessions. And we have a webinar with Matt Frost coming up on managing remote teams tomorrow
Nice.
at 1 p.m. CST, which is really, really exciting. And he says, I see many developers that install free WordPress plugins like WordFence as part of their launch cycle and leave it at that. What do you think about this approach, and what are the differences with using WebARX?
Yeah, so one of the I completely agree that having like some sort of free versions are good for a start. I think that it's a good option for the for mainly for the website owners who are they have their own blog, so they can the website most cases don't generate any money for them, or it depends. But in these cases, I think it makes completely sense to try some free products first. But for a very good example, thanks for bringing out WordFence, is the fact that WordFence free version doesn't or basically has a delay for firewall rules or for the patches for these vulnerabilities for 30 days. So now if you think about that, if a one-day vulnerability will become exploited within hours, then how does it help you when you actually receive the rules for these vulnerabilities after 30 days?
Wow.
This applies only to the WordFence free version. On the premium version, they actually ship them right away. But it's something that a lot of people don't know, and therefore they are relying on a lot of the cleaning services and so forth, which I'm not a big fan of.
Does that render WordFence free useless?
No, I don't. I can't say that. I mean, it's definitely doing a good job with different threat blocking. I think it's filtering a lot of bots. It allows you to actually scan the site for malware. It does a lot of things for the hardening side as well. So I think it's still like a good thing to get into. But I understand their business kind of business model is for getting you into subscription, and having firewall rules being delayed for 30 days is a fairly good argument.
That's a good trigger, yeah.
To start paying.
And regarding the differences with using WebARX, you guys obviously do your own security testing on the one hand, and then also you roll out virtual patches so that even if a plugin developer or theme developer did not install a fix yet or roll out an update for a security fix, you already ship that update on behalf of that plugin author, essentially.
Yeah, so what we do is that we are very, very much focused on the plugin vulnerabilities. We don't actually do like on a daily basis. We don't do malware scanning on the websites or on our customers' websites. What we actually just really focus on is understanding on what does the stack of your website contain. Like, what kind of plugins do you use, what kind of versions do you use, what kind of themes do you use, what kind of PHP versions are you running, what are the like JavaScript libraries within your website that you are relying to, and this information is all being sent to WebARX, and then WebARX is basically analyzing all that information against the different vulnerabilities that we internally check. We also run a plugbounty.com, which is basically a how to say it in a very easy way. It's like a hack. Okay, HackerOne is also maybe not known so much, but basically it's a platform where ethical hackers can basically find vulnerabilities within these plugins and themes. And when they find something, we as a company pay them for basically for contributing into the WordPress security ecosystem. And yeah, we have like around 1,000 ethical hackers there at the moment. So it's still in beta and we are still testing it out and so forth. But basically our idea is that we do everything as proactively as possible, so we could actually get into the root problem. And the root problem really is the fact that there's just so many plugins out there, and the users don't really look into the code of the plugins, and it's very easy to just end up with a site that has vulnerabilities within there, just coming from all those different third-party components.
That's a great point. And there's another good question coming in. Sorry to interrupt again.
Yeah, sure.
From Elizabeth, how do hackers know which websites to target?
Yeah, so in some cases, they if it's possible, they start enumerating the websites, which means that, for example, you could take an IP range, for example, of a GoDaddy, let's say. And then you can start looking for README files. And then you can see like WordPress.com/WP content/plugin/ let's say a plugin name /readme.txt. And you just write against that. And if that opens, well, that plugin is installed. Then they get the list of all the websites that have this vulnerable plugin installed, and then they just run the exploit against all these sites. But I would say lately the computing power is very easy to access nowadays. So people really don't, like the hackers don't really bother anymore to enumerate, and they just basically take the exploit. They have like the IP ranges of hosting companies who have, let's say, WordPress sites or a lot of WordPress sites, and they just target these exploits against every single site they basically see or get in front of them. So they actually run it against like millions of sites at all the time, and maybe like 70,000 get hit, but that's a huge number. So yeah, that's how they do it in many cases.
So your site existing is enough to make it a target?
I have a very, very good example, actually. I think it was a year ago or so. We were attending on a conference with WebARX. So what we did there is that we the day before the conference, we registered, I think there was like 5 different domains in 5 different hosting companies, like the big ones like HostGator, GoDaddy, like SiteGround, like all these different ones, completely randomly just took like the shared host there. And then we registered the domains. We just put installed some Astra template, like just random, like I don't know, used just
placeholder sites essentially.
Yeah, basically placeholder sites, and we just put them online. And then we enabled WebARX on them, and then we went to the conference and we put the big screen there and said that anyone can just fire against these websites, right? And you could, in the live on the screen, you could see all the attacks coming in. But what we didn't expect was that it took like 2 or 3 hours after the domain registration when the site started to get hit with random bots trying to exploit vulnerabilities, and WordPress vulnerabilities specifically.
That is pretty insane.
So there's bots literally like completely fully automated in terms of finding the sites, and then I'm not sure if they even enumerate it, but because WordPress is just so popular, it just makes sense to run any exploits against WordPress as possible, because it's like, let's say 35% of a chance it's a WordPress, so it makes sense to just push the exploits against WordPress.
Yeah, that's pretty high. And there is another question that's a little bit more technical and related to hosting, so I think we might push that back, Stephen, till we get a little bit deeper into this presentation, but I will make sure that we get answered for that.
Okay, so I'll just have a few Zeroday examples, which I'd like to just to show, because you probably have heard about these. There was just in the early September, there was a Zeroday vulnerability within a file manager plugin, which allowed in arbitrary file uploads, and it was it was quite a mess. I mean, websites were infected with a PHP script that basically was then a backdoor or a dropper. The sites were also were injected with ads and all sorts of nasty stuff. This actually went on for a whole day before the developer was able to release a patch, which means that, well, sometimes I hear that, yeah, my sites are completely secure if I just enable automatic updates. Nothing would have helped you in that case. I mean, you would have automatic updates for all the plugins, but this plugin didn't have any update. It was just there. The vulnerability was there. It was exploited, but there was no update available, which you could just update and solve the issue. So this is a very good example of how 0 days actually affect your site and create a lot of havoc. Another one was from the earlier this year in TeamRex add-ons, where a 0-day vulnerability was actually detected sometime later, and it allowed an attacker to execute any PHP function. But most importantly, it allowed the hacker to just register an admin account, which is like, if you have an admin account, I think this is like checkmate, right?
It's the worst thing that can happen. Yeah.
So, and then some Oneday vulnerability examples. I bring out WP Bakery here because in some cases I feel that it's a bit too, I'd say it very well. It's like sometimes people are too harsh about these things because I know that a lot of people from this summit and from other places as well have asked me like, oh my God, like WP Bakery, like 4 million websites are almost like, hacked already and in a way. And then, okay, WP Bakery had an authenticated cross-site scripting vulnerability, which was detected by WordFence. And it was first reported to the developer, and then the developer fixed the vulnerability and then let know of its users. Okay, then let's go to the next one. The blog designer was unauthenticated cross-site scripting, which means that the vulnerability was first reported to the developer on 4th of April, actually was done by us at this point, because I think, so what we in WebARX do is that we also scan the plugins that you use as our customer, and we do like a routine checks if like the very popular ones that are used among our customers are written securely, and if there's any issues that someone else might find. So instead we find for them, or we look for them, and then we let the developers know and help them to fix them. Anyways, on 4th of April, a vulnerability was detected. The patch was released on May 2nd. And after that, it took some time. And basically what we found out that it was the same thing with the changelog that I mentioned. So in the changelog, there was like a security fix, and there was like, that side. And then hackers started to exploit this right away. But there is a difference now with the authenticated and unauthenticated. If you see the vulnerabilities, in most cases, you see this word somewhere on the vulnerability description. And I just want to talk about that a little bit, because I see a lot of people getting like into the panic and so forth with the vulnerabilities that are, within the millions of websites, but which we never see being actually exploited. And this is a key to solve this puzzle of why some of these are getting exploited, and some which in this case have like 4 million websites are not being authenticated. It's the same vulnerability. It's cross-site scripting. One is authenticated, one is not. The one has even 4 million sites. The other one had much less. And yet again, one was much more being exploited. So the thing is, authenticated vulnerabilities literally require you or literally require the hacker to first have an account to your website, which means that it doesn't matter which kind of privileges you have. A lot of sites nowadays have like registration still open. Sites, especially e-commerce sites, have registrations open. Some sites use the subscriber role for even like newsletters I've seen, and so stuff like that.
I use that on the WP Agency Summit too. I also need to create user accounts. Yeah.
So for example, in that case, the sites are vulnerable for that cross-site scripting attack. But if it's unauthenticated, that means that the attack can be or like the vulnerability can be exploited even without any access to the website. So you don't need let's say any role literally to the website. You only need to know the URL of the website basically, and you can just target that. But I just wanted to bring that out because I've seen a lot of people just being in panic in many cases where there's vulnerabilities. For example, vulnerabilities in plugins that are not so often used in eStore environments, for example, and therefore it's not that common for the sites to be exploited with this vulnerability because there's just no way for the hacker to get an account, right? So I'd like to, for people also to, just keep their eyes on that as well and think about this, because this is actually giving you a good understanding of why you actually shouldn't keep the registration open if you can.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we do have another good question that targets a little bit about the basics of security, specifically hosting level security versus an external service like WebARX. So Elmar had this question. Say I host a website on Kinsta, WP Engine, or Flywheel. What's the biggest difference in security between them and WebARX?
I mean, we have customers who are using all of them. The thing is that your hosting company is mainly focused on securing the environment itself. They're focused on securing the stack that helps them to host your website. So whatever, like this, the server level, really, like the let's say Apache or like Nginx, and like you need to keep the PHP updated and stuff like that, which you don't have access to and which you don't really work with that much as a website builder, let's say, or an administrator. The difference is that these hosting companies are mainly focused on the security perspective on that point, but our focus really is on the on what you actually use on the website and on the plugin vulnerability side, and for that sense, we still see a lot of sites being hacked on all these platforms if they don't have if they for example have let's say plugin vulnerabilities such as we mentioned previously. It still happens because we have a dedicated team who is like fully, and even like a community of ethical hackers who are finding vulnerabilities within the third-party code that or like in the plugins and themes that you are using, who are like focused on providing virtual patches for these vulnerabilities. But it's not the job for the hosting company. It's just that it's not on their focus really. They focus on a different side of the security, on the hosting side, to make sure that there's that the performance is good, that the sites run smoothly, that there's no downtime, stuff like that.
Server-side backup, stuff like that. Yeah,
exactly.
That ties nicely into Stephen's question that I postponed earlier. In your opinion, how effective are mod security and fail to ban for securing a site? And does your app work with or replace them? It would be great if you could elaborate a little bit first what mod security and fail to ban really is.
Yeah, so mod security is a open source project under OWASP, which is open web application security
something
program.
I googled that real quick.
Yeah. Anyways, it's a community of security
project, open web application security project.
Yes, sure. So yeah, it's an open source tool that is being built by a large amount of pretty much like how WordPress is being built. There's a lot of contributors. People are contributing to the building of that and so forth. So with OWASP or with the ModSec, it's basically a firewall that sits within your, let's say, Nginx or Apache service, or in PHP with PHP. So it's filtering the traffic. It's like a firewall basically. The biggest difference is that ModSec isn't managed firewall. It means that you have like a preset rules for preventing, let's say, SQL injection and cross-site scripting and so forth, but it doesn't protect you from plugin vulnerabilities because plugin vulnerabilities are often very logic-based. There's sometimes cases where the plugin has just the functionality that can be abused in a bad way, but you couldn't really categorize this under a single, like, let's say, SQL injection or cross-site scripting vulnerability. And with the new ones coming, like I said in the really beginning, we provide protection modules for approximately 50 plugin theme core vulnerabilities each month. The new ones, which we need to make new rules or the protection modules for. With ModSec, you just rely on the rules that they have created or the community has created over time. So you don't have like this real-time managed firewall. You need to really manage the firewall yourself in that case. And fail to ban, I have not used that so much by myself, but it's basically allowing you to, if I'm sure, it's basically giving you like an IP filtering if you see that the traffic is, for example, if there's ModSec traffic, or like if the ModSec is filtering the traffic for you, you basically can ban the IPs or the users who try to abuse the site. I could be wrong because I haven't used that myself that much.
Thank you so much for explaining. And that reminds me of another topic in that context of keeping the website, the firewall rules up to date yourself versus have your team do it. It's similar with data privacy stuff. So terms and regulations, the cookie law, cookie notices, cookie policies, data privacy policies, stuff like that. There is a really good webinar on this event with Ayubenda that is in the replay. And you can go to wpagencysummit.com/IUBenda to see that session. And it really goes to show that you need a team of lawyers really to make your website secure in terms of compliance with regulations and laws. And it's similar here. You need a team of hackers to really protect your website from the bad guys. And we have tons of questions coming in, Oliver. So that is really good to see, but I'm not sure how far we get with your presentation. Let's go through the next one. Graham is a good one. In many cases, I assume hacks significantly slow down sites by interfering with our caching, bloat the site's database, and/or interfere with native security. Your thoughts and input would be valued. Graham, to be honest, I'm not so sure where you're targeting with that question.
I think it's about the WAFs in general, because they are filtering the traffic, so it takes resources to filter the traffic. I can tell you a little trick that we did in WebARX to make it as lightweight as it is that because WebARX is sitting in app, which means that it's inside the website, we know that if the user who visits the site is authenticated, or if it's not authenticated, we know what kind of plugins your site actually has and so forth. That allows us to actually, for example, we have this virtual patches module for WordPress that is being applied to all WordPress sites once you connect it to WebARX, right? And what it does is that it sends the information to the WebARX from your website about what plugins and themes and all these versions and everything is installed. And WebARX basically registers your website only for the patches that apply to these plugin vulnerability or to these plugins that you have installed, which means that if the traffic hits to your website, we don't run the traffic through like millions of rules. We only run them through the ones that actually make sense for your website to have. So once you install, like, let's say you install some new popular WordPress plugin, then your site is automatically subscribing to all protection modules for this plugin, for all the versions of this plugin and so forth. This also allows us to avoid all false positives. Because I know in some cases where there was the Elementor vulnerability with the Elementor add-ons, where with the Elementor add-ons allowing you to basically bypass the registration or like open the registration, and then the Elementor vulnerability itself allowed an authenticated user then to upload a backdoor to the website, basically. And there was an issue that if you wanted to block this vulnerability, what you needed to do is you needed to block a function that was used also on the earlier versions and also on the versions that were not actually vulnerable. So that would means that most of the security vendors who actually released a protection rule or firewall rule for that vulnerability, all the Elementor sites with these previous versions of Elementor started to break down because this functionality could not be used anymore because the firewall rule was blocking it. In our case, we could just say that, hey, just use this, like if the site has Elementor version, very specific version, only then apply this firewall rule. So this makes the site run much less rules, or run the traffic through much less filters and so forth. The site really, like the performance hit is much lower.
That's something that you as an end user probably cannot influence, right? It's something that the provider of the WAF has to do.
Yes, exactly. And that's why I think in WordPress specifically, I think having managed, like making sure that the WAF is managed is very, very important. I mean, the share, like just the amount of vulnerabilities that are being introduced every single month. I mean, you would need a separate team in your own company to even cope with that. And we don't, and at the same time, if you use a WAF that is not managed, that just relies on some generic rules, it's just a matter of time when some logic-based vulnerabilities or vulnerabilities that doesn't go under like OWASP 10, or like this OWASP 10 is like this top 10 vulnerabilities within web applications. If they don't fit there, and very often WordPress plugin vulnerabilities don't, then they just go through.
That is so important to know. There's another great thing from Peter. What are your thoughts on using fake README files, links, or other common documents as honeypots or canary tokens to get warnings?
I mean, you're gonna get warnings anyways. I mean, as I was saying, like how does it really help you? I mean, it doesn't really help you in terms of knowing if the site is being targeted or not. In most cases, I would just suggest you accept with the knowledge that once you put the website online, it's most probably gonna be targeted. Like it's called like obscurity through, or like security through obscurity. I'm not a real believer on that. For example, I also don't believe in things like hiding the WP admin panel and or like the admin login and things like that. And in general, I don't really believe in hardening plugins, for example, on the plugins that provide you like all these different hardening options, because once you have a vulnerable plugin installed that allows that hacker to just run or like upload some or inject JavaScript to your front page, for example, none of the hardening measures that you take will make any difference, except for maybe having like direct PHP execution done. So if a backdoor is being uploaded to your site, a PHP file is being uploaded to the site, and the hacker can't actually run the PHP script directly, which we do at WebARX as well. This is one thing that we do for our customer sites from the hardening point of view. But other than that, I've just seen too many cases where hardening just doesn't do much a difference. And when we look at the security state of WordPress ecosystem itself, 90%, I think it was 98% of the vulnerabilities are coming from plugins and plugin vulnerabilities. So 98% of the security issues actually happen because of the plugin vulnerabilities. Sites are being injected with malware, with JavaScript redirectors, with even credit card skimmers. They inject JavaScript that basically sits on the background, and whatever the people put into your payment form, they just casually send it also to the hacker.
That's handy.
It's very, very handy for them.
Wow, that's good to know. And we had a conversation about that off camera beforehand, in relation to how WordPress plugins get built these days. And you brought a really good example of something that I'm guilty of as well, is that programmers tend to reuse code that has been uploaded publicly on sites like Stack Overflow, for example. And I think everybody who's writing code has been to that site more than once. And they just reuse the code as it is uploaded. So what hackers would do, you've told me, is they would just scan through Stack Overflows for vulnerable codes and then they can scan the repositories of the plugin, find that code snippet, and they know exactly what type of plugins to exploit.
Yeah, it's one of the methods of finding the vulnerabilities within the plugins for getting access to 0 days. Because like people, especially in PHP, a lot of copying is being done. A lot of code is being copied from Stack Overflow. Actually, the same thing with JavaScript. But there's a lot of stuff on Stack Overflow. For example, some suggestions to solve some very specific or a simple thing when it comes to like database management, or there's like functions that are not sanitized and so forth. And people just copy these, and some of these get like really popular. I mean, if you Google some issue or some problem, then a same Stack Overflow solution would come up, and it's like really popular, right?
And they have like thousands of upvotes sometimes.
Yeah,
so there must be thousands of people using it.
Yeah, exactly. So what happens is that thousands of people have copied it. So now the hacker just copies this function there, which someone suggested, and he sees that it's vulnerable. And then it just runs through the WordPress repository and sees all the plugins that have used the same functionality, and all of them are vulnerable with the same vulnerability.
Yeah. And this happens so scary. It really, if you think about it, is really scary. And Peter brought up an interesting concept. Is there too much security? So he has 7G, failed to ban custom hardening, and iThemes Pro and WebARX.
Oh, the full thing.
So that's 4 knocks there.
I mean, sometimes things start to. Sometimes the different layers can start kind of affecting each other. But usually, I haven't seen cases where it has become like a real big issue. Mostly it's, Peter said that there was no issues with performance, so I guess that's not the case, but sometimes the performance becomes an issue, right? And what's very performance heavy actually is the malware scanners. Everything that sends, or like everything that works with files, really. So backup plugins, malware scanners, everything that is trying to put the stuff together and send it somewhere, then scan through the code and stuff like that. This is actually, and if you have like malware scanning set on a daily basis, or after every 5 hours, you can expect your site to be fairly slow.
That's a good thing to know. Is there an overlap between Blockvault's malcare? I'm sorry that we don't have Akshat on. I had Akshat on yesterday evening to talk about maintenance businesses. Is there an overlap between Blockvault's malcare and WebARX?
Usually when we see, like, malcare has a good scanning for malware, right? So I've seen people use it together. I think it's a good match in terms of that. As again, I believe in focus. So I believe in that you should use, or like you should solve a problem with the right tool. So if you want to be protected from plugin vulnerabilities, you use WebARX. If you want to be, if you want to have the knowledge that none of your users accidentally uploaded some malicious code to your site, or installed a null plugin, for example, or the site got breached because your admin credentials were posted on Facebook or something like that, then it's good to have malcare. I mean, they will do the scanning for you. They will let you know if there's something something wrong on the file system, or if there's some malicious code there. And I also actually suggest using a DNS-based firewall on top of that as well, because DNS-based firewalls are really good with handling bots, like the bots that are not really trying to exploit your website or get access to the website. And in some cases, the DNS-based, and in most cases, in very often cases, the DNS-based firewalls actually can't protect you from WordPress plugin vulnerabilities. For example, Cloudflare. We've seen so many sites that are being injected even though they had Cloudflare and they thought they were secure. But it's, again, focus. So Cloudflare is really good with preventing the, or keeping away the traffic that you just don't care about, like the bots that try to crawl your website. who are not human, so forth. And then Cloudflare does a really good job on that. And if you end up being DDoSed, Cloudflare takes that load away from you.
Yeah. So
Then,
good example for these bots would be the Hrefs or SEMrush bots that build these massive databases of websites so that they can deliver SEO analyses for their customers. You don't want your website in there.
Yeah.
You really don't. They just add server load.
So yeah, I would say like use the tools for the right thing. So and that gives you the most efficient security build up, pretty much. I'm not really. Yeah, we actually went to this way. If there's people who have been with WebARX from the very beginning, at one point we even decided to also start adding backups to WebARX and whatnot. But we learned really quickly that if we start taking away the focus, then everything basically everything is affected. So focusing on a single thing, helping people to solve the plugin vulnerabilities and third-party code issues in WordPress, which is by the fact the biggest issue in WordPress at the moment, literally the biggest vector for the security issues. Then using the other tools that are specific to other issues to solve these. And this will make your security build the most kind of effective. I think that's the good kind of approach to the security.
Yeah, that's a good point. And as we are already 51 minutes in and we still have questions coming in, I would appreciate if we could just skip to the demo. Yeah. And then maybe, because I'm really excited about the demo, and I think it's really nice to show how these attacks work in real life. I'll make the slides full screen for that. And then if we have time left, we can address the questions. And if not, you can address them in the chat directly, Oliver.
Yeah. So I wanted to show you authenticated SQL injection, which is a bit harder type of SQL injection. But what SQL injection really is that you can basically send queries to the site, and it allows you to basically communicate with the database. And this is authenticated from the WordPress perspective, which means that the user first needs to have some sort of account to the website. In this case, which I'm going to show, the user needs to just have the contributor role, and it can directly start manipulating the database. I'm not sure how well it's seen. It's pre-recorded, so it's just in case, but it's a vulnerability that we found some time ago. I actually used that on I'm organizing capture the flag challenges in Estonia, which are we basically do hacking competitions for students and so forth. So we basically give them a vulnerable website. They need to figure out what is vulnerable there for education purposes, and then basically there are competitions like that, which I have run for 2 years now. And this summer actually I opened a hackerspace in the city as well. So I'm really believing into kind of contributing back to the community as well. But anyways,
I imagine that to be a very dark underground style.
It's not. It's actually not. We actually do a lot of different things there. We like last month. Each month we have like a DIY event on every Wednesday. People come together to program some different. Like last time we had like programmable USB sticks that mimic to be a keyboard. So once you put it into your computer, it can just basically start writing commands directly to the terminal and start, I don't know, recrawling YouTube videos on your screen and stuff like that. So just fun things, I'd say. Anyways, what's happening here is that there's a website which has this vulnerable plugin installed, which allows you to customize the login page. So the user needs, or the hacker needs to register a account, and usually it can be like a contributor for newsletter or whatnot. And then there is an exploit which is then exploiting the vulnerability within the plugin, and it's trying to guess the different characters within the database. So with a single basically command on a command line, as you can see, it sends a question to the site about, hey, what's the name of your database? And then it starts to just it's called time-based SQL injection. It starts to check each character on the name of the database, and then as you see here in the output, the name of the database is actually bitnami /WordPress. It's the name of the database, and it just starts to print out the output. And you can actually do the exact same thing with an admin password. So you would get the salted admin password, for example, or you get any other data that you would want from the database. So it's just a very small demo about how these things can happen and how easy it is actually to be able to run these kind of attacks. So now just imagine running this script against, I don't know, hundreds of thousands or millions of websites at the same time. Just a small reality check.
That is really, really interesting, because what people might not know is you can find toolkits for exploiting this stuff online, and you can find tutorials for that online, so that even the most non-technical person who can essentially type in a command line, it just looks intimidating, but it's really straightforward if you're following a tutorial. Everybody literally can exploit a WordPress website. That's also what they call script kiddies, when you're not really knowing what you're doing, but you're still causing harm on websites.
Yeah, and it's very, very easy if you put like on YouTube, like how to hack WordPress, for example. I'm pretty sure there's like a lot of videos with very specific, download this tool here and then basically, fire the lasers in a way, right? So there's I've seen a lot of tools where it's basically like, okay, select target, then press enter, and then it starts to exploit all the known vulnerabilities against this website.
So it's really easy.
Yeah. So and that's the thing. That's why there's just so many attacks going on, and it's your resources. I mean, you're paying for the server, you're paying for the traffic that you have built for the website. And I've seen a case where a customer was coming to us. They were actually on SiteLock, and they came to us after, and they said that they spent a lot of money on the cleanups. But what happened was that they ran 100K of ads a month against the website, and they realized that the site was hacked and it was redirecting traffic to PharmaScam, which is basically selling illegal drugs through their website, basically. So now, it's not a very good use of your advertisement money, I would say.
I could use 100K for something else. Yeah, definitely. So there's one last important question I want to bring up before we wrap up this conversation. Some hosts disallow security plugins. First of all, why is that? What do you think about that? And would WebARX be impacted by this?
I know that some of the managed WordPress hosting companies disallow it because the plugins are like, they have very specific setups for the website. For example, they need like they don't want the plugins, for example, to interfere with HD access or with the config files, and there's like very specific configurations for these sites in the managed hosting environments. So for that reason, they have like disabled these, and in some cases they also, well, I've talked to some managed hosting companies. They say that one of the reasons they also disable them is that in many cases, when you, for example, run a malware scanning plugin, for example, it takes the resources, it uses up a lot of resources to do the scanning, and it affects the performance. And then the hosting company is getting like support queries like, hey, why my website is so slow, even though it's done by them. So yeah, it's at the same time, like, they do allow some security plugins. So it's about which plugins, how the plugins are built. We haven't had so far any issues with our plug or like our solution being used on managed WordPress hostings.
That's good to hear. And you already have the slides up where people can get in touch with you. I would also love to point the viewers of this webinar to wpagencysummit.com/WebARX, which is your virtual booth on this event, where you are running your game for the WebARX birthday month and giving away some cool prizes for the winners of this game. So if you want to learn more, check this out. Check the website out, wpagencysummit.com/WebARX. The replay of this webinar will also be embedded there. So if you want to dive deeper into some of these sessions, definitely catch the replay. So Oliver, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mark and Graham and everybody else, thank you so much for attending. And
Great.
we'll talk soon.
All right.